the camera gear I bring when I'm photographing a music festival. My Sony A7R III, a fisheye or wide angle lens, a 70-200 telephoto lens, a mid-range 24-70, an external flash, a Rode Mic Pro Plus, batteries, bring extra. This is the best camera lens a beginner photographer can buy. This is the 50mm 1.8. And not only are they cheap for nearly every camera system, but they're a prime lens, meaning that you can't zoom in or out. So this will actually help you improve your photography skills by having to physically move yourself to get the composition you want. And since this lens can go down to f1.8, it will help you learn a lot more about lower apertures and how they affect your shot. Here are 3 pros to my camera, the Sony A7R III. High resolution. The Sony A7R III has a 42.4 megapixel full frame sensor, which means it can capture a lot of detail in a single photograph. Fast autofocus. The Sony A7R III has a fast autofocus system that can quickly and accurately focus on moving subjects. This is great for a variety of photography styles. Lastly, excellent low light performance. The A7R III has a wide ISO range, which allows it to perform well in low light conditions, making it especially suitable for shooting concerts. Here are 3 things that every photographer needs in their bag. First up is at least 1 spare battery. This is especially important to have in your bag because it can be really frustrating to have to stop taking photos unexpectedly. Having a spare battery allows you to keep shooting. And if you're at a shoot in a location with a power outlet, you can simultaneously charge the second battery for maximum efficiency. Next up, a microfiber cloth. You never know what's gonna get on your lens when you're out and about shooting. And please don't wipe down your $1,000 lens with your shirts. Avoid scratches and fingerprints and always have one of these on deck. And finally, extra SD cards. I've said it before and I'll say it again. These are crucial. Even if they're cheap ones, grab a few of them and throw them in your bag. You'll thank me later. What the F is aperture? Aperture is the opening inside of your lens that light passes through. Aperture opens and closes to control the amount of light that enters your camera. And the aperture number that you see, like f4 or f8, is actually a fraction, but more on that in a second. What you need to know is that a smaller number like f2 actually means a wider opening, and a larger number like f16 means a smaller opening. An easy way to remember this is with fractions, because 1/2 or f2 is obviously bigger than 1/16 or f16. And a larger opening means more light, and a smaller opening means less light. Why you should shoot your photos in RAW versus JPEG. These are the 2 most popular formats available when shooting with a modern DSLR camera, like the one I'm using to record this video. For me, this is one of the biggest things that changed my photography for the better. Along with learning how to shoot in manual mode, shooting in RAW had a huge effect on my photographs when it came to the final edits. The reasoning for this is because a RAW photo that you capture with your camera will be completely unprocessed and uncompressed. So when you capture a RAW photo, you're capturing all of the data that your camera sensor has when you take that photo. Whereas if you shoot in JPEG, you'll be capturing the exact scene or subject at pretty much what you've exposed it as. No additional data is captured. While shooting in RAW does take up a lot more space than shooting in JPEG, it will still be worth it due to having complete creative freedom when you're finally editing those RAW photos. The major advantage of shooting in RAW is that you don't lose any valuable image data. With RAW images, you can really bring a photo to life by adjusting the temperature, exposure, and clarity amongst many other variables, like in this example photo I took in Iceland. The possibilities with editing RAW photos are really endless, and it's the best file format to really hone your editing style. But there's obviously a limit to what you can do with RAW photos, like if you've completely overexposed your image beyond repair, for example. If you're a beginner photographer, you need to photograph everything in every style to find what you're truly passionate about. I think this is not only the best way to find what type of photography you love the most, but it also forces you to learn photography in a way watching YouTube videos can't. Get in the field and get your hands dirty. Concert photography taught me how to shoot in low light and how to freeze action with a fast shutter speed. Portrait photography taught me how to work with lighting. Real estate photography taught me the power of the aperture and that you don't always have to shoot with it wide open. Nature photography taught me composition and to take my time while setting up the shot. The one beginner photography tip to actually get better that no one will tell you. The only way to improve is to go out and shoot. It doesn't matter how many videos you watch or how many courses you buy. If you're not shooting often, you won't progress. This is something that you need to commit to. Invest your time and understand that you won't become a pro overnight. You need to practice as much as possible, and if you're really about this photography life, practicing every day or every other day is ideal. What is ISO or ISO? However you want to say it. ISO is a setting on your camera that will brighten or darken your photo. The higher the ISO number is, the brighter the photo will be. As easy as this sounds, if your ISO is too high, there can be consequences. Look at this example photo of the artist Toki Monster I captured with my old Nikon a while back. It has a relatively low ISO of 1000, but there's still a lot of noise and grain due to how dark the venue was. lens. While in some cases this can be fixed or mitigated, it's super annoying to deal with when you're editing. Low light concerts and astrophotography are really good examples of when ISO will be especially important to focus on when you're shooting. But if you're shooting during the day, an ISO of 100 will be perfectly fine. With raw images, you can really bring a photo to life by making the colors pop, like in this photo I captured of a big confetti moment during a Louis the Child show. This wouldn't have been possible if I shot the photo in JPEG, which is why you should always shoot your photos in the RAW file format. RAW and JPEG are usually the two main file formats available when shooting with a DSLR or mirrorless camera, like the one I'm using to record this video. The reason you should shoot your photos in RAW is because a RAW photo will be completely unprocessed and uncompressed. Now, this does take up a lot more space than your regular JPEG image, but you'll have a lot more creative freedom when you're editing. This is what's referred to as a family photo in the music industry, or at least the EDM industry. It's when the artist takes a photo in front of and with the crowd. And if everything goes right, the house lights will also turn on, giving you optimal lighting for the shot. Usually if the artist wants a family photo in the last 5 to 10 minutes of their set, you'll have that discussion in the green room prior. Don't be afraid to ask as well. Even offer to be their reminder, so when there's less than 10 minutes left of their set, you can simply write family photo in bold and all caps in your notes app and discreetly get their attention without disrupting them from their performance. My favorite family photo has to be this one of Phase 1 and Wooly during their B2B set at Thunderdome back in 2020. I shot this with a fisheye lens at 14mm with an ISO of 2000, aperture of f4, and a 1/200th shutter speed. Here are 3 settings on my camera that I check before going into any hybrid shooting, photo, and video gigs. First, I make sure that my photo format is set to RAW. I personally think that there's no argument for shooting client work in JPEG. Not only do you want complete creative freedom when you're editing your photos, but you also want the opportunity to save the over or underexposed photos that have potential to be bangers. Something you can't do if you shoot JPEG. Next, I check the resolution. For YouTube videos and music videography, I'll shoot in 4K. For the TikToks and Reels I filmed for my day job, I'll shoot in 1080p. Lastly, I'll check frame rate. I'll use 24 frames per second for normal speed YouTube videos and concert footage. I'll use 30 frames per second for filming TikToks, and anything higher is all for slow motion purposes. 50% of video is audio, so if you get this part wrong, you're going to be in a bit of trouble. And generally speaking, the built-in microphone on your camera just won't cut it at these super loud shows and festivals. So it's definitely worth investing in an external microphone like my Rode VideoMic Pro Plus. I've added a link to this exact mic in the description below. I highly recommend getting it for your concert videography. Now, I've said this in a couple of my videos already, but a pro tip that will save you when you're recording live real-time audio at a show with a louder genre like dubstep, for example, is to set your mic to -10 decibels so your audio doesn't sound like this upcoming video. Wait for the drop. Which frame rate should you be filming in? Even if you've heard of frame rate, it can be hard to be sure which choice is best for your videos. After all, there's so many factors to consider when choosing a frame rate for your videos. In most cases though, you'll be shooting your concert videos in 24 frames per second, which basically means each second of video shows 24 still images. That specific speed tricks your brain into perceiving smooth motion, which is why 24 frames per second is the best frame rate for raw clips, and essentially any footage that you want to film in real time or normal speed. Real time is great when you want to show the energy on stage or in the crowd. By shooting at normal speed, or 24 frames per second, your viewers and the fans of the artist you're filming get a better understanding of what that concert felt like. A fast lens means a low aperture number, which means it'll have a shallow depth of field, but more importantly, it's going to let a lot of light into the lens. Shooting artists and festivals is a very different style than other types of video shooting, because you don't really have any control over the lighting, or anything else for that matter. Having a lens with a fast aperture like f2.8 means that even if the lighting isn't the best, you're still going to be able to capture at least a decent video with the lighting that's able to enter your camera. Now, my personal recommendation is you want a lens that's at least f2.8 or faster. Rent the lenses if you have to, but I will say that I have filmed artists with an f4 lens before, and it treated me well with really no complaints. Here are 3 tips every videographer needs to know. If you want to slow down your footage at all, you must shoot in 30 frames per second or higher in order to maintain that smooth motion. If you shoot in a log color profile, make sure you overexpose your shots to make it easier to color grade and color correct while editing. And make sure your shutter speed is double your frame rate. 30 FPS equals a 1/60th shutter speed. Here is a simple guide to frame rates and when you should use certain ones. 24 frames per second is best used for talking headshots like this one. You won't be able to slow these clips down, but they will look the most true to life. Then you got 60 frames per second, which is where I find myself shooting a lot of my B-roll in, as you get to slow your footage down to as slow as half the speed, giving you a very nice slow motion effect that isn't too slow. And finally, you got 120 frames per second, which is best used for when you really need to slow something down, smooth something out, or show off a specific subject. The concert videos that you're watching right now are called raw clips in the music industry, or at least the EDM industry. A raw clip is the footage that you capture of an artist during one of their songs and or a big moment that's taking place during their set. Usually you'll film the buildup of the track and maybe 10 to 20 seconds after the beat drops as well. When you're offering your photo and video services to a client, sometimes they will only request raw clips, since that's what performs better on socials, especially when they're converted to vertical. What do these 3 videos have in common? Would you believe me if I told you they were all staged? If you're roaming around a festival to capture footage for whatever your assignment is, you're gonna save so much time simply asking people to pose or dance for the camera instead of waiting for the magic to happen. I mean, a shot like this is obviously staged. They were already excited coming in, but I told them to cheer and face the camera. Would you believe me if I said this shot was staged as well? The idea here is that you don't want to run around waiting for a cool moment to happen when you can save so much time by simply staging it yourself. So work smarter, not harder, and stage your shots if the opportunity arises. Here are some noteworthy shots and moments that I've captured that you can use as examples or inspiration if you're tasked with filming the artist performances at a festival. The artists vibing and having a good time on stage, their infectious energy and enthusiasm as they perform, radiating their passion for the music. Capture audience reactions with the artist in frame. And on the same note, capture wide shots to showcase the massive crowd. Switch things up by getting a close-up of the artist with a telephoto lens. This is something you don't see often and can easily be utilized for your video projects. Continuing with the unique composition and angles, don't be afraid to try out new and visually striking compositions. And lastly, production highlights. Using Above and Beyond as an example, one of their gimmicks is typing heartfelt and motivational messages on screen in real time. If the artist that you're filming has a gimmick like this, make absolutely sure that you capture it. Here are some noteworthy shots and moments that I've captured that you can use as examples or inspiration if you're tasked with filming the guest experience at a festival. A group of friends posing for a photo, excited for the weekend ahead. Sincere, unscripted moments. A festival attendee dancing her heart out. The hardcore fans in the front row. The anticipation and excitement as attendees enter the festival grounds for the first time. Friends with matching outfits who are clearly ready to be on camera. And on that note, anyone in any sort of unique outfit as well. And of course, epic moments where the guest experience and music collide. Know your worth. Don't work for a rate that you're not happy with. Understand the amount of hours you'll be putting in when you're out shooting and the time spent editing as well. Not to mention the amount of years you've put in to master your crafts. You're pricing value and time. Closed mouths don't get fed. I wasn't supposed to work with Afrojack in rehab this last October. The email I sent out to their management got declined, and I was being overly ambitious anyway. But after their photographer couldn't make it, their management reached out to me the night before, and I ended up closing out main stage at EDC Las Vegas with 2 EDM legends. So if you want something, just speak up. Being a professional music photographer means understanding your assignment and knowing what to focus on. And I found that there are 3 main things that you need to truly focus on when you're photographing a concert or a festival. And the importance of those 3 things change depending on who you're hired by. Guest experience, stage production, and artist performances. If you're hired by a festival, promotional company, or even the venue itself, guest experience is most likely going to be the top priority. If you're hired by the artist, their performance is top priority. It's important to make sure you're not nesting backstage in order to capture an artist the entire time, especially if you're expected to capture the guest experience as well, or if there are other photographers you might be in the way of. One of the best ways to make sure that everybody wants to hire you is you have some kind of social media presence. Having an online presence makes getting a creative job much easier because you don't have to spend all your extra time updating resumes, reaching out, sending cold emails, or any of that extra work. It's about building a personal brand even while you're an employee at some day job, because it can pay off so much in the long run, and it can help you get in the right rooms with the right people. It's not easy and it takes a long time to do, but I promise if you do it right, it's going to open up so much more opportunities compared to sending resumes or cold emails to every single company or potential client. What is net 30 in photography? Net 30 is just a payment term where the client has 30 days from the date of the invoice to pay you, the photographer, for your services. The net in net 30 just means that the payment is due in full without any deductions. While net 30 is usually set by the seller, in this case the freelance photographer, it's not unusual in the photography world for the buyer, aka your client, to be the one that dictates payment terms. How do you build a portfolio if you don't have access to the photo pit, or if you're not able to bring your camera into the venue? Well, spec work is the hardest thing about this. You're gonna need to humble yourself and start small and shoot for free. Now keep in mind, this is the one time I'll advocate for shooting for free. But after 2 to 6 months, depending on how many shows you shoot and how fast you build your portfolio, I would advise never shooting for free again, because you're worth way more than that. Plus, once you get that first deposit from a client, there really is no going back. If you're in the portfolio building stage of your concert photography journey, make sure to contact your local clubs and venues and offer free work in the context of building that portfolio. You can even contact the openers at these small, medium, and even larger size shows, as they won't be against free work. Shoot as much as you can at these smaller shows. And while you're at it, this is a great time to meet as many people as you can in the industry so you can simultaneously build that network. There's going to be a point in your concert photography journey where some manager or artist is going to ask you, what's your rate? If you haven't been paid as a concert photographer yet, or you're not used to charging money in general, a natural response to this is declining the payment or offering more free work. Here's why that's the wrong thing to do. You deserve to be paid when your photography does the work that the client needs. Period. Never talk yourself out of being valued. At that point, the person who's asking for your rate saw your portfolio and thought you were worthy enough for not just a job, but for payment as well. There is no magic threshold where at one point you're an amateur and at the other you're a professional that deserves to get paid. The real difference is in acknowledging your own worth as a photographer. But I mean, if you're still walking into a venue and don't understand how to shoot in low light or how to freeze a crowd with a fast shutter speed, then you gotta be a little realistic with yourself. But if you do know what you're doing with a camera, then the only other thing that matters is meeting the expectations of your client. When you're getting into the music industry, you need to understand that every potential client is different. You're not going to charge the same amount of money for, let's say, an opener at a show as you would the headliner. And that's where value-based pricing comes into play. You're going to want to be cognizant of this, because if you're working with an artist that has a larger following, team, and production, you're gonna charge a little more. But if you're working with a local DJ or opener that's trying to get their career off the ground, you can't expect to charge for the same amount. I mean, you can try, but they will simply not answer or offer what's in their budget, and it's safe to say that's usually around $50 at most. The idea is that you'll reach a point where you're only accepting bigger shows and bigger clients down the line. But in the beginning phases of getting paid, you have to be realistic of your rates with smaller artists. Possible expectations and assumptions that you might experience from an artist or their manager are the following. That you'll prioritize their artist if you're working with multiple artists, like at a festival, for example. That you'll deliver most or all of the deliverables by noon next day. That you love the concert and festival life, because no matter how much you get paid or how much you love photo and video, you are inevitably paying with your time in a lot of cases. If you traveled by plane, you're spending your own money for an Uber, Lyft, or rental car once you land. Same applies to the food you're eating, because there's no per diem. This probably changes if you're on tour with a bigger artist. But at festivals, there's a good chance you'll get a catering pass for lunch. And one that I've definitely experienced is that you'll use a fisheye lens. The absolute minimum payment you should accept per artist is $350, no less. So if a manager asks you to shoot for 2 of their artists, you should at least be making $700. And this is for photo and video per artist. You can aim for higher, $400, even $500 per artist. But the higher you raise that rate, the higher the chance the manager says it's out of budget and you can lose out on the job, or the manager simply just doesn't reply to you. $350 per artist means that you are driving to their show, assuming it's somewhat local, shooting photo and video during their hour-long set, and editing up to 20 to 30 usable photos and 10 to 15 usable raw clips and delivering the final assets to the manager via a Dropbox link by noon the following day. Here are 3 key elements that should be included on every photographer's website. First, and the most obvious, your photo gallery. This will be the heart of your website. It should showcase a diverse selection of your best work. Like if it isn't a hell yeah, it shouldn't be on your website. Also, you should only feature the type of work that will attract the clients that you want to work with. In my case, I have concert, adventure, and lifestyle photos. Next, an about page. This will give your site visitors insight into who you are as a photographer. Share your background, experiences, and approach to photography, and include a professional or cinematic photo of yourself for that added personal touch. Lastly, integrating your social media to your website as a form of supplemental social proof. This is an all-access media pass that can pretty much get me anywhere that I want at the festival that it was made for. It's exciting to receive credentials like these, whether it's a photo pass or an all-access laminate. And in this new social media day and age, it's almost a natural impulse to want to share a photo of your photo pass online. But here's why you shouldn't. In short, these passes are inherently a security measure. People will actually try to forge passes to try to get into the festival for free, which leads to fake passes and attempts to gain entry, which makes it harder for everyone. And festival logistics are already a nightmare. So if you do post passes, wait until the concert, festival, or tour are long over. And lastly, hide the passes in your photos if it's around your neck, or cover them up before posting. Here's my worst experience as a music photographer, part 1. I was on my way back to Portland after shooting at Forbidden Kingdom Festival in Orlando, but my flight got delayed due to thunderstorms, typical Florida. Because of the delay, I ended up missing my flight in Chicago, where I had nowhere to eat, nowhere to stay, and the Uber prices were more expensive than the hotels. So I was pretty much stranded for the night. I ended up hanging out in the lobby of a nearby hotel until my new flight, which was the following morning. About 90% of the time you're not shooting or editing, you're figuring out logistics and dealing with situations like this one. My worst experience as a music photographer, part 2. I was shooting for Rez at Contact Festival in Canada when my camera just stopped working mid-set. I admittedly had a mild panic trying to figure out what was going on and what photos I wasn't able to capture during that downtime. After taking out the batteries and the memory cards and doing that Nintendo cartridge troubleshooting trick to my camera, I'm led to believe that it was the external battery grip that was attached to my camera short-circuiting. After taking the battery grip off, it was smooth sailing from there, but dang was that scary. Imagine being hired to shoot in another country and your camera stops working. Easily one of my worst experiences as a music photographer. At this festival, I noticed a photographer on top of this rig behind the crowd capturing the show, and was definitely getting paid for it. The following day, after some social media research, I reached out to the photographer on Twitter and asked him straight up, "How do I get your job?" Serious inquiry. He replied 15 minutes later, and his advice was to start shooting, struggle for a few years, hopefully get better, expect nothing, work hard, and focus on the images you're creating. 2020, a year that was supposed to be one of the greatest. We all had high expectations and entered the new year with excitement and colorful skies. Not a single one of us could have had even the slightest idea of what was about to happen. Even by February 1st, 2020, I was working with Phase 1 at the second Thunderdome event in Tacoma. 2 days together capturing photo and video. Honestly, I was having the time of my life. That was even when I upgraded my logo and my business name to what it is today. I was riding the wave of all the gigs I was getting hired for. I was even close to getting hired for 2 of my biggest festivals yet in March. But then, you know the rest. You can achieve anything that you want in your life. You can build a career that you want. You can become a successful music photographer. You can build a successful YouTube channel. Whatever it is, you can do them all in your lifetime. You just can't do them all at once. And more importantly, you won't excel in any of those fields, creative or otherwise, if you're not willing to invest consistent hours into mastering them. Last week, I was flown out to Dallas, Texas for a shoot. It went exceptionally well considering the amount of unknown variables there were. Like if the employees of the company were willing to be on camera, what the locations looked like, and things like that. That said, the reason I believe it went so well is because the team and I were organized from the get-go. We knew what was being shot and a general outline of when and where it was going to happen. So if you have a big, high-stress shoot coming up, make sure to get as organized as possible. It will make a big difference. Create a shot list and a schedule. Know exactly which camera gear you're going to bring. Dial in the logistics if travel is involved. Trust me, you won't regret it. If you're new to photography, this quick story is for you. Back in 2016, I purchased a secondhand Nikon D5300 in order to start shooting with an actual camera instead of my phone. To practice using my new camera, I visited Multnomah Falls here in Oregon, and a lot of the photos I was taking were too bright or too blurry, and I admittedly had no idea what I was doing. This was obviously because I didn't have a fundamental understanding of how to adjust the ISO, aperture, aperture and shutter speed on my camera. I probably didn't even know what they were at the time. So while it's important to go out and shoot anything and everything to get better at photography, make sure you at least spend some time learning camera basics first, otherwise you'll waste so much time Googling how to do something with your camera instead of shooting bangers. There is a part of the creative journey where you won't quite fit in with your friends' schedules, lifestyles, and expectations of you anymore. This is arguably one of the toughest parts because the pressure to conform becomes greater than ever. But you came this far, so trust your creative process and keep going. Here is some no BS advice on concert photography that you need to hear. You need to put in the work. You will lose sleep. Accept having a flipped schedule. Learn to work under pressure. Get your edits done by noon next day. Master shooting in all lighting conditions. Be safe when you're on stage. Get creative with your work. And just put yourself out there and know that it can take months to years to really build that traction. In this quick Lightroom tutorial, I'm going to provide a couple of tips on how you can get the PYRO in your photos to go from this to something like this. First tip is extremely obvious, and it's to shoot your photos in RAW. Next, you have to have the photo properly exposed before uploading it into Lightroom. This specific photo of a craze was shot with a 12mm lens, had an ISO of 1000, the aperture was set to f6.3, and the shutter was at 1/640th of a second. If the aperture didn't compensate for the higher ISO, the shutter speed definitely did, because that's how the exposure triangle works. Basically, if one of your settings is higher and could potentially overexpose the image, in this case it would have been the ISO, the other settings can compensate for that to properly expose the image. In this case, it's the shutter speed. Lastly, the most important tweak to focus on when editing a photo with PYRO in it is the highlights. And you most definitely will need to lower them until your PYRO isn't overexposed and has that realistic look to it. In my case, something around -59 looks good to me. In this quick Lightroom tutorial, I'm going to provide a few tips on how you can get the lasers in your photos to go from this to something like this. First, I pulled the highlights all the way back since there were some sections of the photo that were overexposed. Next, I bumped the contrast up all the way to 100. If you've seen my work, you know I'm a heavy contrast guy. After that, I raised the clarity all the way. And no, I don't do this for 90% of my photos, but in this case, it really gives the lasers that razor sharp look that I really like. It also emphasizes the crowd more. After that, we'll raise the vibrance all the way. And last but not least, the cherry on top to really make the photo your own, scroll down to the calibration panel and experiment with the red, green, and blue primaries. What did the trick for me is dragging the blue primary hue all the way to the left, which gives the photo and lasers a desaturated green that I really like. Believe it or not, the vibrance and saturation sliders in Lightroom are not the same. So here's the difference. The vibrance slider is going to control the weaker and less prominent colors in your image, aka the midtones. This allows you to balance out the saturation levels if that's your editing style. While the saturation slider will simply increase all of the colors in your photo at once, allowing you to go from complete black and white all the way up to this absolute disaster of a color grade. For me personally, I not only find myself using the vibrance slider more often, but I'll also raise the vibrance much more than I'll ever raise saturation. The first thing we need to do in order to convert a horizontal video into vertical is by going to sequence settings, and changing the frame size to 1080 horizontal and 1920 vertical. The rest of the default settings don't need to be changed in this case, and we can click OK. And if this message pops up, you can click OK again. Now that we have the correct aspect ratio for mobile, we can move over to effect controls and adjust the scale and positioning accordingly. If there's a lot of horizontal movement and the vertical real estate isn't showing everything important that's happening, you can utilize keyframes to help with that. For example, in this video of Afrojack and Rehab, they both look back at me at different times, but the vertical real estate only has enough room to show one of them. So what I would do in this case is position the video to show Afrojack since he turns around first. And as he turns back towards the crowd, add keyframes to move the footage horizontally until Rehab is on screen. Once the keyframes have been added, it will look like the camera was being moved by you, the videographer, instead. In this Premiere Pro tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can slow down your footage while maintaining that nice and smooth looking slow motion. It's important to keep in mind that for the best looking results, you'll want to ensure that you're filming your footage in 30 frames per second or higher. In this example, I have a clip that was shot in 60 frames per second that's already on the timeline. To slow down this clip, right or double click on it, then click speed/duration. Now, since this clip was shot on 60 FPS, the slowest we can go while maintaining smooth motion is 40%. That's because 40% of 60 is 24. and 24 frames per second is the lowest FPS you can choose where the clip will still play back with smooth motion on its own. On the screen now is how slow each of the following frame rates can go before the footage becomes choppy. And the higher the frames per second, the slower you can make your footage. Now back in Premiere Pro, once you have a speed selected, in my case I want it played back at 50% speed, you can simply click OK. I asked ChatGPT to write a YouTube short script about music photography, and here's what it said. Music photography is all about capturing the energy and emotion of a live performance. Cut to a series of fast-paced shots of the photographer taking pictures of the band on stage. It's a challenging and rewarding job, but it's not just about pointing and shooting. Cut to a shot of the photographer adjusting their camera settings and composing a shot. As a music photographer, you need to be prepared for anything. You never know what the lighting will be like or what kind of action you'll be capturing. Cut to a series of shots of the photographer capturing different moments of the concert. The lead singer belting out a solo, the drummer hitting a fill, the guitarist shredding a solo. Whether you're shooting a big arena show or a small club gig, it's important to be in the moment and react to what's happening on stage. Cut to a shot of the photographer reviewing their photos on the back of their camera with a satisfied look on their face. At the end of the night, it's all about getting the perfect shot, and when you nail it, it's an incredible feeling. Fade to black, with the words music photography displayed on screen.